In the last 72 hours alone, 14 new conflicts erupted across the globe, not by accident or chance. Conflict often begins with smaller things like suspicion, provocation, and feelings of being threatened. Long before the modern world existed, humanity gave this invisible force a very specific name: Andras. Here's what most people don't know about the entities described in medieval grimoires and texts. The famous ones like Lucifer get all the attention, but there's one that's barely mentioned at all. And that obscurity is precisely what makes this particular entity so fascinating to study today. Andras appears in the Lesser Key of Solomon, a grimoire from the 1600s listing 72 spirits. Most of these entities were said to offer something valuable in exchange for being summoned properly. They promised knowledge, wealth, influence, secrets, or power to those who called upon them correctly. But Andras is different because he offers absolutely nothing in return for the summoning ritual. According to the texts, he only does one thing, and one thing alone: he initiates conflicts and wars. The grimoires warn that Andras is extremely unstable and nearly impossible to control once summoned. So unstable that if the summoner makes even one tiny error in the ritual, it ends very badly for them. But here's where the symbolism gets really interesting and starts connecting to modern psychology. His appearance isn't random at all. It's actually a detailed blueprint for how conflicts escalate. He's described as having the head of an owl, a creature that watches silently and patiently in darkness. The owl represents surveillance, observation, and waiting for the perfect moment before striking. He rides a black wolf, which symbolizes territory, pack mentality, and the tribal us versus them mindset. And he carries a shining sword in his hand, the universal ancient symbol of open conflict and battle. So you've got surveillance, tribalism, and violence all combined into one symbolic representation. Does that combination sound familiar when you look at how modern conflicts actually start and spread? Because that's the exact formula we see playing out in wars, both historical and contemporary ones. But Andras doesn't operate the way you'd expect a traditional force of destruction would operate. He doesn't storm in with armies or destroy cities directly according to the medieval descriptions. Instead, the grimoires say his real power lies in sowing discord between people who were once united. He takes allies and turns them into adversaries by planting seeds of suspicion and mistrust gradually. He replaces trust with doubt, cooperation with competition, and understanding with misinterpretation. He fractures relationships at every level, from personal friendships to international alliances. And here's the most unsettling part of how this symbolic entity is described in the ancient texts. He doesn't actually create animosity or hatred from nothing, from a completely blank emotional slate. He simply takes the small tensions that already exist and amplifies them exponentially over time. Think about how this pattern played out in real history, like the events leading up to World War I. In 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was taken down in Sarajevo. Just one single incident in one city. Just 6 weeks after that one event, 20 million people across Europe were engaged in warfare. That massive escalation didn't happen because one incident magically caused everything that followed. It happened because all the underlying tensions, grudges, and alliances were already in place waiting. The rivalries between nations, the wounded pride, the competing interests were all there beforehand. All it took was one spark in the right place at the right time to set everything ablaze completely. A minor insult became a matter of national honor that demanded response and counter-response endlessly. A simple disagreement transformed into fundamental ideological differences that couldn't be bridged. A basic misunderstanding escalated into formal declarations that committed millions to the battlefield. This is what scholars now call the Andras Pattern in conflict studies and escalation theory research. The medieval grimoires also warned about another crucial aspect of dealing with this symbolic force. They said Andras is almost impossible to control once the process has started and momentum builds up. Once summoned, the texts seem he inevitably turns on the very person who thought they could use him. Which might sound like pure mythology until you realize that's literally how conflicts behave in reality. Leaders often believe they can control the situation, contain it geographically, or what's very quickly. But once violence starts, it spreads in unpredictable ways far beyond anyone's original intentions. It eventually consumes resources, economies, and lives, including those of the people who started it. Now let's look at how these ancient patterns manifest in the world we're actually living in today. Modern conflict isn't limited to traditional methods involving physical armies and traditional weapons. There's information warfare where truth gets distorted and narratives are weaponized for influence. There's cyber warfare where lines of code can shut down power grids and paralyze entire infrastructures. There's economic warfare where financial pressure and sanctions become silent tools of coercion. But before any of these modern forms manifest physically, there's always one preliminary stage first. That stage is division, the process of breaking down unity and creating separate opposing factions. Division happens when people stop seeing each other as individuals with complex lives and perspectives. Instead, they start seeing only categories, teams, sides, labels that erase nuance and humanity completely. Everything becomes framed as us versus them, right versus wrong, good versus bad with no middle ground. Differences that could be opportunities for learning become threats that must be defended against. And in our hyper-connected digital world, this division spreads faster than it ever has in human history. One post on social media can reach millions of people within minutes, spreading like wildfire globally. One unverified rumor can ignite collective outrage and anger across entire communities almost instantly. One screenshot taken out of context can permanently damage someone's reputation before truth catches up. When strong emotion overrides careful logic and reason, the Andras Pattern has already begun its work. Let me give you a concrete modern example of how this plays out on a small scale every single day. You're scrolling through social media and you see a post expressing an opinion you strongly disagree with. It's not even that important in the grand scheme of things, but something about it really bothers you. So you decide to respond with a comment explaining why you think they're wrong about their position. The other person doesn't back down. They double down on their original statement and add more arguments. Then their friends notice the exchange and jump in to support them. Then your friends see it and join too. Within an hour, thousands of people are arguing about positions they didn't even hold originally. Half of them don't even remember or know what the original disagreement was actually about anymore. Congratulations, you just participated in feeding the exact pattern that the ancient texts warned about. Here's perhaps the most important insight we can take from studying these historical, symbolic patterns. The worst conflicts aren't ones forced on us, but ones resulting from our own choices repeatedly. They result from thousands of small choices we make when we could have chosen differently instead. The choice to escalate a situation instead of taking time to listen and understand another perspective. The choice to immediately retaliate when someone offends us instead of pausing to consider their intent. The choice to defend our ego and need to be right instead of defending our shared humanity and connection.